year.
Huh?
I remember you from last year.
And this is the first time I've been on I'm like really nervous. Everybody keeps saying like, oh,
well then I can say something else. No, I think this is like good plenary because everybody's just talking about what their chapter has done. So, like you were there. So it's not like anybody can tell you you're wrong. You know. Yeah.
I guess you're right.
I mean, it'd be cool to be on there like Carlos Montez, but like,
That would be even more stressful.
oh, I know exactly. Like that would be cool
not
to
today.
say that, but
Maybe it's
It's just like, are you
how's the convention been so far?
It's been good. Yeah, I got to meet like a lot of good people that and like people that I haven't seen in like forever.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know, I kind of wish it was more active on Facebook because like some people like that like are really cool like excellent people that I only see once a year or something during a convention. Yeah, definitely.
And I'm just really bad at I got to know like my group better because I like just joined my group last year. Like last year. No, like last year.
Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started soon. So 5-minute warning. Thank you.
Go outside my chapter.
People hanging out outside. Just sand the rocks, bro.
Isn't that just oh no, they're totally cool. Like the Punisher does kill CA shit. It's awesome. Yeah, no, I totally know. I've seen it on top of it. But like, real
She was holding him. Yeah, 1 second, then I
yeah, I think the fucking
Fallon? Hi. Hi. There we are. Yes, there you are. Can you hear us just fine?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, perfect. And do you want to be facing the crowd or are you good like this?
Maybe. Yeah, sure. That's fine. Yeah.
You like this? Yeah? No face
Yeah.
part? Okay, perfect. Cool. And then I think with that, I'll go ahead and put on you here. You just press this. When
there's no video.
Time to...
There's no video right now, is that correct?
Huh? Oh, yeah. Thank you. I just muted it while we were down here so people didn't look at the laptop on the stuff. Okay. So after you've introduced, you just press this again to get the volume back up. And then, let her figure it. You guys
It's actually born in Texas. Yeah.
The green?
Sorry, because not a lot of people.
Oh, you're right.
And then you can click that little, yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was at UT,
I'll
not
take the phone
Arlington,
now.
but
Thank you.
UNT. No, well, I was in Austin, so but it was still UT.
Okay, here we go. Thank you all for coming back to the final stretch. So this is going to be the final plenary, and then after that, we're going to have the final block of workshops. And this one is going to be about campus struggles, education rights, access, diversity, education for all. So here to host this section is going to be Martin Branyan from the University of Minneapolis SDS. But before we go into that, I want to just announce that the Palestinian activist Rosmia Oda, who was tragically recently deported as a showcase trial for political oppression. She had previously been an organizer in Chicago in the Arab American Action Network. She was actually the vice president, trying to help Palestinian women get acclimated to life in the United States. She was recently deported to Jordan, but she will be calling in with words of solidarity and a message for... Very excited. That will be something that happens first thing in the morning after breakfast. A lot of tears. And I also want to mention too that SDS's convention this year was helped greatly by financial aid, by donations from a few of our sponsors, including the Rosenberg Fund for Children and the National Lawyers Guild. And we'll talk a bit about them after this plenary, and then after the workshops, kind of before we wrap up the conference. But okay, so with that said, unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to hand it to Marty to take it away.
Take us home.
Awesome. So we're going to get started with the final plenary of the day called Whose Campus? Labor Solidarity and Education for All.
Just turn the computer around so that they can see the camera.
She said she didn't want to prefer
Oh,
that.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
she's okay like this.
But anyway, so our first speaker is going to be Fallon from Arizona State University. Fallon is a third year at Arizona State University and the chair of ASU SDS. Her favorite activities are disrupting Turning Point events and participating in armed demonstrations against fascism. So with that,
Hi everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Marty. I'm a little nervous, so forgive me for stuttering a little bit. But I just wanted to start out with some background about what it's like organizing on ASU campus and what kind of environment we're dealing with. We're a relatively conservative campus, and we're also in a red state, so we face both a lot of limitations and we also get away with a lot of stuff. As I said, we're allowed to participate in open carry demonstrations in Arizona because of the fact that we have open carry laws that allow us to do that. So, I know not a lot of student organizations get to do that, so we're kind of lucky in that regard. But on campus, there are a lot of limitations, and we have very strict designated free speech zones and stuff like that. We have a lot of opposition from conservative groups on campus. Their Turning Point was mentioned. We have a Turning Point chapter. They dox a lot of our liberal professors. And we also have a Young Americans for Liberty chapter on campus. So these are both pseudo-white supremacist, pseudo-fascist groups on campus that we have to deal with a lot. And we also have a lot of opposition from administration. Because of the fact that they're conservative and paid, conservative legislature pays for their salaries and stuff like that. They have a lot of interest in shutting us up. So that's just a little bit of what we have to deal with. We also have a fairly apathetic student body, so we also have to deal with that when trying to get people out to actions. But we chose a tuition campaign for our flagship campaign because it's a pretty nonpartisan issue. It's really easy to get people out for that, or at least some support for that. No one likes paying a lot for tuition. No one likes tuition hikes, so it was really easy to garner support for that. When we were doing petitions, we even got the college Republicans to sign our petition. So that's just an example of how everyone is against tuition hikes. And the timeline that we had, we split it off into the 2 semesters of our year. For the first semester, it was solely awareness. That was what we were trying to do. We're a fairly new club on campus, and people don't really know who we are quite yet, or at the time didn't know who we are. At the time, we started off with pamphleting and petitioning, and those were very successful because because of we're a student organization, we're allowed to table on campus for free. So we spent a lot of our time handing out zines. Those are really popular. The DIY zine stuff here is very popular on campus. So we started handing out that kind of stuff and sending around our petition. But what was most successful, I think, was the guerrilla advertising that we did, and that was also the most fun. So if you guys wanted to try something like that too, that's always a blast. But I don't on our campus though. Guerrilla advertising and banner drops, flyering where we're not supposed to is very much against school policy. And I mean, like, you know, whatever, fuck school policy. But if we break too many rules, we'll lose our student organization status, and it didn't really seem worth it. So we decided that we would do guerrilla advertising but keep our name off of it as much as possible. So we did several banner drops advocating for tuition hikes or against tuition hikes and things like that, and for general education for all banner drops and stuff like that. Those got a lot of attention from our school newspaper and sort of really just put the idea in people's minds. It also made things really tense on campus too, which worked in our favor because it got people out of their seats and to our actions. But then later, the next semester, after all of the advertising was done, we started doing letter drops. We would write letters with our demands and send them to, or deliver them to Michael Crow's office. Michael Crow was the president of ASU. Our demand was very simple. It should have been super easy. It's just, we wanted to put a cap in place on campus, tuition freeze, which means that tuition wouldn't be raised any higher, indefinitely. And Michael Crow had already instated that and then broke that promise a couple years prior, so we didn't feel like it was that much of a difficult ask, but apparently it was. He responded by sicking a bunch of deans on us, and they attempted to negotiate with us and weirdly tried to bribe us. It was very strange. They were saying things like, oh, we can, if you know anybody that's having any problems paying for tuition, then we'll just, pay their tuition. But they're not going to solve the problem of people, who, the root of the problem, I should say. Another cool thing that we learned while we were in those negotiations, though, is that Arizona is a single-party consent state, which means that if you are allowed to record anyone in the public area space, as long as it's as long as you're the only one consenting, you're the single party that's consenting. So we were able to record all of the interactions with administration. They did not like that. They did not like the idea that they could be recorded. They saw someone's phone sticking out of their front pocket and confiscated it during a meeting. So that was pretty rough, but fortunately 3 other people were recording also. So we got a lot of, we put a lot of their language in our pamphlets and stuff like that. Like, can you believe that they said this? They call ASU an enterprise rather than a school. They do not believe that it's an education institution. It is an enterprise. So we got to turn a lot of that against them. And then also, as we started to get more and more, as we started to escalate more and more, we participated in more direct actions. We started by picketing outside of Crow's office building, and reading from the Arizona Charter, which states that public university needs to be as free as possible. We also did secondary letter drops. We increased the aggressiveness of the language and stormed Crow's office with picket signs. And I have a very, very loud megaphone. It's 50 watt, and it was ear splitting in that tiny room. So that was nice. And then as it started to get even more intense, we started doing sit-ins in Michael Crow's office, or rather he has 2 offices, I guess. He has his office where his secretary sits, and then he has the office proper where he sits. And we occupied the room where the secretary sat. That was very fun. We sat there for 4 hours and attempted to deliver a speech about how Michael Crow was, abusing the student body and things like that to Michael Crow himself. And we attempted to enter his actual office, but the secretary put herself between us and the office, her whole body physically. She put her body on the line to protect Michael Crow, I guess. So it was either we stand outside there and yell at the speech in her face, or we, try and physically push back past this tiny white lady in front of a bunch of cops. So we decided we would just, toe the line in that sense. And we also ended the year occupying rentable spaces. If you're a student org, you can rent them for free, but also people can pay to rent them. So we just occupied Hayden Lawn around. There's a skylight around the library that is just a really odd structure, and everyone on campus calls it the nipple because it just sticks out of the ground like that. So we sat there and had a teach-in. And they threatened to call the cops on us a couple times for learning about entomology on a perfectly public space. But every time they said that they were going to call the cops, we said we wouldn't leave, and then they ended up not calling the cops at all. So, win-win. Sort of proved that they're not really willing to engage with us as much as they think. What we learned after doing all of that and kind of our plans for next year, next semester, as far as direct access and stuff like that. This year we're working on building more awareness and just doing more of that work, specifically more guerrilla stuff. We think we can kind of springboard off of the political climate right now by just making people more tense and things like that. Also, we're cutting out the raise tuition language, RAZE, specifically because not many people seem to know what raise means, so they're really confused. And then also we wanted to try doing direct action trainings because during the sit-in, a lot of people were moving out of the way when people were trying to walk by. And I get it, it's embarrassing and scary, and we don't want to be rude or anything like that, but that's also kind of the point of us being inconvenient. So to be rude, so we're going to try and do that. And luckily this year we have a lot more leftist groups on campus, or 2 more specifically, because some of our members went off and started other groups. We now have a Young Democratic Socialists of America group on campus. And we also have a coalition for a multicultural center because we're the only public university in the US that doesn't have a multicultural center.
Wow.
So now we have a lot of, we have at least 50 people now who are consistently able to show up to actions from various groups. We also are joined by United Students Against Sweatshops, which is a labor org specifically on campus. And we've actually kind of managed to radicalize some of the Amnesty International kids, so they're going to be joining us too. That's all I got. I'm sorry I kind of ended on a weird flat line, but yeah, that's it.
That works now. All right, thanks so much for that, Fallon. That was awesome to hear your experiences. So we'll be coming around to questions at the end, and then we can ask them to the whole panel as a whole. So Fallon's going to stick around for that too. But moving on, our next speaker is going to be Colin. Colin is a law student and organizes with the National Lawyers Guild and writes for Fight Back. Colin is going to be speaking about student labor organizing and his experience with that. So take it away.
Do that, John.
Yeah, so, hey everyone. So as the comrade said, my name is Colin. I work with the National Lawyers Guild on my campus, and I've been invited to come speak about student labor solidarity organizing that we were doing. So I think just in terms of framing, right, how do we want to think about what we're doing when we're trying to mobilize students in support of workers? We have to understand a class analysis of the university structure, right? So one thing that Freedom Road Socialist Organization says a lot is that the universities, by and large, are recruiting and training grounds for the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie, right? That's how it's framed. When I arrived at my current university, I forget what it's called, orientation, right? The orientation speech that they gave was, you've made it. You're now a student, you're gonna graduate with a degree, you have nothing to worry about, you're on your way to being a boss or a manager. And don't forget all the people that you've been sort of working with and building with, and as long as you sort of lay low, get good grades, make friends with the administration, sort of play nicely with the administrators, we'll make sure that you're taken care of in life. This is your path towards advancement. But we understand actually that as students we have more in common and more of a shared sort of economic and material interest with the workers who actually keep the university running on a day-to-day basis than we do with these independently wealthy sort of, usually millionaire sort of fellows or corporate boards of overseers. My university has not only a board of overseers, but also an official corporation that holds the purse strings and can consent or deny any particular like disbursement of funding. So that's really who we're up against. We're up against these people who are independently wealthy and whose interests are in maintaining the current sort of economic order. So just one story that I think really brings this out really sharply actually comes from my campus. So in the early 1900s, the president of my university was a guy named Abbott Lowell, and his family owned textile mills north of Boston in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Now, if you know labor history, that might ring a bell because Lawrence is the site of the famous 1912 Bread and Roses strike. So in that strike, a little over 23,000 workers who were by and large immigrant workers from 40 different countries, most of them actually between the ages of 14 and 18. They went on strike at these textile mills because of the terrible conditions, right? So at the time, 36% of the people in these mills were dying before the age of 25 due to bad ventilation and insulation, wages that people couldn't live on, etc. So January, these workers go on strike. My university, a couple miles south, remembering the president is this guy who's independently wealthy. He has a stake in making sure that these textile mills, that the strike is broken. This guy actually offered students an exemption on their midterms if they would get on horses and join the cavalry to go harass the strikers, right? To go break the strike. Wow. And it's this messaging of, if you play well with us, if you play your cards right, as the comrade who spoke before me said, come in and tell us if you hear something that you're unhappy with, and we'll work together to sort of, resolve it in a way that allows the administration to save face. And it's saying, sell out workers to get this exemption on your midterm exam so that you can then go and become part of the ruling class. And at my campus, the only organization that actually supported the workers was the Socialist Club, right? They raised funding for the Workers' Strike Fund. They sent students to the picket lines to go physically reinforce the workers and stand with them as their classmates with administrative kickbacks were busy like physically assaulting the strikers, right? So this is, I think, the dynamic that we're really working in when we're talking about making the university a place where the working class actually has the power to decide, what the university is going to look like, how funds are going to be dispersed, etc. Because we know that the people who benefit from cuts to worker salaries, these are the same people who benefit from cuts to ethnic studies programs, not giving state tuition to undocumented students, like all of these other things are for the benefit of the kinds of people who staff boards. So the specific sort of organizing campaign that I was involved in that I want to talk about is the dining workers strike that kicked off last year. So 750 dining workers at my campus. They're organized under Unite Here Local 26, which I'm wearing the t-shirt. Super cool organization, very, very, really a fighting union, right? It understands its role as winning concessions from the bosses with force by showing that workers have the power to shut shit down if they're not being, paid what they deserve to be paid, etc. So their contracts with the university ended in the summer. And because there were organizations on campus that had a history of doing student labor solidarity, and because students had gone out of their way to build a relationship with the union before that, the union reached out to students on my campus and said, hey, we're about to face a massive fight against the university. We need students on board. And because we had that relationship with the workers, we were able to sit down and lay out a timeline for escalation, because the union can tell us, these are the days we're in contract negotiations, this is where they're going to be located, we need students to turn up on these specific days. So that kind of collaboration really sort of laid the groundwork for what ended up happening. So let's see, I'm on. Ooh. Yeah. Okay. So during the first phase, right? So the workers voted 97% in support of going on strike. They voted 97% to authorize a strike if their demands weren't met. The university was trying to cut their health care and was also going to double down on a system of cyclical layoffs. So every summer, a good portion of the university workforce is laid off. And they're not allowed to collect unemployment benefits over the time that they're laid off, because technically they have the offer to come back and resume work next year when the students get back. So for a lot of people, this means that over the summer they don't have a source of income. And the university was trying to double down on that and was refusing to pay workers a guaranteed minimum annual salary of $35,000. So the workers voted 97% to go on strike. And at that point, our job was to start to build student understanding and solidarity and really a recognition of what the workers were up against and why they were going on strike. And the university, you know, these guys are vicious. Like, as soon as the workers voted to go on strike, the university starts bombarding students' emails with, workers are going on strike, it's going to disrupt your exam schedule, it's going to disrupt your ability to get meals. Like, we pay the workers enough. You know, they'll say, workers at our university are paid more than minimum wage, therefore they're asking for additional things, that's just being greedy. The workers would rather go on strike than negotiate with us. So, like, really, you have to really be prepared to start really aggressively fighting back against that. And it's difficult when the administration has more resources than you, right? They can send one email with a click of a button and it hits every student inbox at the university. Students, on the other hand, have to be more creative in how we're reaching out and building with our classmates. So, you know, as the comrade mentioned, guerrilla flyering and postering. My campus doesn't allow tabling at all, like you're just not allowed to table, so we have to do guerrilla flyering for the most part. Reaching out to student organizations that are friendly to co-sign statements of support that you can then send with a press release to local media so that they'll cover it like, hey, students are on board with the workers, the administration's standing in the way of that. And Northeastern, actually, which is another university in Boston, they were really creative. So they are primarily, it's like really a commuter campus. There's not a lot of space on campus where students tend to hang out, so guerrilla flyering is more difficult for them. But they found out the overwhelming majority of Northeastern students were plugged into this Facebook group, this Northeastern meme page. So they started making all of these pro-worker memes and uploading them onto this Facebook group, and that's how students started to hear about the worker struggle. And they actually got a lot of traction, right? Like, these memes were being posted, like, people were sharing them, like, folks were really stoked. And it's example, right, it's kind of silly, like, you think of memes like, okay, maybe that's not a serious way to, like, build real, you know, power and a real solid coalition between students and workers, but, like, you really have to adapt your tactics to the conditions. So during the strike, our goal, as we understood it, was to challenge the university's narrative, to amplify the workers' analysis and worker voices, and to educate students about the structure of the university and its pressure points so that we would know who do we need to apply pressure to shut stuff down, to stop business as usual. And as I mentioned, we found out that at my university, it's really these 13 independently wealthy fellows. And you can figure out who these people are. And these people come to camp, they fly in from all over the country once every couple of months to sit down and basically approve the budget or to say, no, we don't think you should be doing whatever you're doing. So what we did was we figured out where each of these 13 fellows' separate businesses were. So it's people like, it's lawyers who might be a partner at a law firm in San Francisco. That's an actual example of one of the fellows. Or someone who runs a company that's based in Atlanta. And because we were working with a union that had a national presence, we actually were able to send people to protest at the locations of these fellows' separate businesses, right? So these fellows are like, okay, my business is protected, like no one at my business is gonna pay attention to what I do as a fellow at Harvard, but it's like actually, because we have the power to really bring the fight to these fellows wherever they are and to fuck up their lives and stop them from getting along with business as usual, that's really what ended up doing it, I think. Okay, so another thing that I want to talk about, right, because a strike is a really specific thing that doesn't kick off that much at most campuses, and there's other ways that you can build student-worker solidarity without it having to unite around a strike. It's a really powerful thing when it happens, but you can also, for instance, send student delegations to visit the boss of like the local managing boss of whatever kitchen you're working with. Say you're working with dining workers, and one of them's like, hey, this boss cut my hours, and I know it's because, you know, I'm a black woman, or like they don't like that I was involved in X political action. It really is, I think it's really valuable to have students go with workers to meet with their boss to show like, look, we have the support of students. Students know what kind of stuff is going on behind the scenes at the university. And that's the kind of thing that really, I think, builds solidarity, and it helps students understand what workers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Let me see if there's anything else that I really wanted to say. Yeah. No, I didn't. I mean, okay, so long story short, the workers won the strike on my campus and actually got concessions on every single demand that they made. So the university, and it's really important the words that we're using when we talk about this, right? The university, their messaging the whole time was workers are asking for things that they don't deserve. we countered that with no, workers are demanding things that they need. It's not something that's optional for them. There's no room for concessions. It's not a negotiation. It's pay us this or we will shut this university down. So I think with that framing, when you have a union that's really willing to fight like that and you can organize students in support, it's like really powerful. And Northeastern just copied the same, a very similar model, and they ended up winning a $5 raise by 2019, a $5 hourly raise because they were super, super underpaid. A 97% coverage of all worker insurance at Northeastern now, and non-discrimination protections for gender identity and gender expression within the workforce. So this is really important. So these are really important, concrete things that we can support workers in their struggle to win that really do enhance workers' ability to demand even more concessions from the university to make even, bolder sort of actions in the future. So the university came out of this stronger with more allies among the student body, and next time they go into contract negotiations, I think the university is going to buckle a lot faster because they really can't win when students and workers unite. So, thank you.
All right, so thanks for that, Colin. Our next speaker is going to be Catherine. So Catherine is an organizer at Tallahassee SDS on Florida State's campus. So Tally has been waging a campaign for affirmative action and struggling against racial oppression at FSU. And Catherine is here to tell us a little bit about what they've been doing and their experiences from that struggle.
Hey, so we all at SDS are here because we believe that education should be a fundamental human right. Yeah. That your socioeconomic status, your race, your class, your country of origin should not ban you from being able to get an education, right? And so I guess I'll start off by talking a little bit about what we're doing at FSU. So Florida is one of 8 states where affirmative action is banned. One of those states is also California. And it was banned in 1999 by then Governor Jeb Bush and then Senator John Thrasher, who is currently now FSU's president. So that's pretty fucked up. The guy who helped ban affirmative action in Florida is now president of our university. Talk about institutional racism. And since then, since 1999, there's been a 46% drop in black enrollment at FSU. It used to be that black people were 12.8% of the freshman class in 1999, and in 2014-15, which is the last statistics, it was 6.9%, which is a 46% drop. In 15 years, black enrollment has been cut almost in half by the banning of affirmative action. And you can see a similar thing happen in all the other states where affirmative action has been banned. I think on average it was a 23% decline in minority enrollment in the states where affirmative action has been banned. And so this is a major thing that is preventing our goal of education for all. Historically, we know that oppressed people have been banned from getting an education. For example, another thing that we are fighting against is standardized testing preferences, which is, okay, so there was this guy, he was a complete asshole, Carl Brigham. He was a notorious eugenicist. He believed in forced sterilization of people he deemed lesser. And so with the College Board, he developed what is currently the SAT. It was originally just an intelligence test, and he gave it to people who had recently arrived in America. A lot of them had never even taken a test. A lot of them the English was not their first language, and obviously they did worse because of that, right? And so that was his proof that white people were superior. And he used that to justify placing limits on the amount of minorities that were allowed into universities and colleges, and he also used it to justify immigration quotas. So you can see that the entire history of standardized testing in America is the history of the oppression and exclusion of people of color. And the SAT really has not changed all that much since then. It's still based off of the same test. And you can see that 95% of the variance in SAT scores is based off of your socioeconomic status. And because socioeconomic status, and the reason because of that is because people of higher socioeconomic status, they have access to better resources, they can get tutors, the study packets, they can retake the test multiple times, etc. Like, it gives you so many additional resources to be able to do well at it. And so since socioeconomic status and race are very highly correlated, you can see that there is a high correlation between race and your SAT scores, right? So you can see that the SAT is a fundamentally racist institution, and the SAT is being used to justify the exclusion of people of color from higher education. Another statistic that here, black households had, I think, 6% of the wealth that white households had. So you can see there's a massive difference in the amount of resources that black people have as opposed to white people. Or sorry, white people have as opposed to black people. Okay, so another thing that we are fighting against at FSU is what's called legacy preferences. This is where a school favors people whose family have a legacy of going there. And since a lot of schools were segregated up until 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, right? And so, and even after that, because of stuff like standardized testing preferences, the incredibly high tuition rates, people of color were still denied an education even afterwards. So you can see how white people have another, again, a major advantage when it comes to the legacy preferences, because their families have been able to go to school and to schools like FSU for a lot longer. So yeah, so why these three things? Well, you can see that schools and universities, what they care about is their image, they just care about their test scores or whatever. This is all part of the capitalist structure and we all understand basically that capitalism is about profits, right? They just care about what's going to make them money. So what we did, we attacked, we basically hurt the university in that kind of way. What we did was we used a lot of the media influence that we have. We campaigned and we protested and we tried to raise awareness about this issue, and it was all over the media about how FSU's black enrollment was dropping. And you can see afterwards that the year that we started doing that was the first year in 15 years that black enrollment did not decrease. So, yeah. Another thing that we've done as part of our Education for All campaign was the Sanctuary Campus referendum. Now, this was last school year when people were talking about the mass deportations of undocumented people, and Trump was attacking the idea of sanctuary cities where undocumented people are safe from deportation. And so we rallied to make FSU a sanctuary campus. We passed a referendum through student government, which passed and officially declared FSU to be a sanctuary campus. So currently, what we're doing is we're waging struggle against the Francis Epps statue, especially since Charlottesville. I always say it wrong. I say Charleston or something. Charlottesville. Okay. Since the white supremacist rally that was there, people have been very aware of the symbols of racism, the Confederate statues and monuments that stand as a symbol of white supremacy in America, right? And there's one on FSU's campus of a guy called Francis Epps, and he is honored as the founder of FSU, even though he wasn't. He was a slave owner. He owned a slave plantation in Tallahassee, which he donated all the money to fund the Confederacy. He also started slave-catching militias, which eventually turned into the Tallahassee Police Department, one of the oldest police departments in America. I think it's the third oldest police department in the United States. And it came from those very slave-catching patrols that Francis Epps founded. And so after Charlottesville, we rallied the students at FSU and the people of Tallahassee at the Capitol, and there was an attendance of 400 people, and we marched from the Capitol to the Francis Epps statue. This was probably the biggest rally that we've ever had in Tallahassee, and it was all over the media, and since then FSU has declared a review of all of the statues and buildings on campus to be considered to be renamed, right? Also, and I forgot to mention, the criminology building at FSU is also named after Francis Epps. It's called the Epps Building, and the criminology program is one of the most African American programs at FSU. So that's pretty fucked up, right? Making black people go to class in a building named after a slave owner. So we're hoping to also get that renamed, and yeah, I think, yeah, so what, oh yeah, also the Epps statue was put up the same year that affirmative action was banned. Yeah, that's ironic. So I guess what are the takeaways from all of this? What have we learned over the course of our Education for All campaign? We learned that we need to protest, and I cannot emphasize this enough. We need to protest, we need to hold rallies. That's the only way that you can mobilize large groups of people like that, and especially since the university cares about its image. That is how it pulls in students, that's where they get their profits from. And the bourgeoisie, that's what they care about, profits. And if we can hurt that, we can get our demands met. And so that's what we did. We were all over the media when the Francis Epps stuff was happening, and the sanctuary campus referendum, also all over the media. Make sure you have media connections, because if you do a rally and there's no pictures, there's no media, did it really happen? You need to be all over the media whenever you do something, especially since the university, it will hurt the university's image, right? And which is why you can see that right after the Francis Epps stuff, they announced the review of the statue, and right after we started making a ruckus about black enrollment was the first year that it did not decline. They are listening, but we have to keep pushing, we have to keep making sure that we keep putting pressure on them to make our demands. So another thing we learned is that you need to take the initiative and be a leader in the movement. If you are a good leader, people will follow, right? With the Francis Epps, the college Democrats just randomly, we didn't ask them, they just decided to support us. They put like the Francis Epps referendum all over their social media. All other kinds of progressive groups were trying to like partner with us and to like help us out with our campaigns. So that's how you build these coalitions and these groups, these large progressive groups, is you start up a good campaign and lead that campaign, and if the people are behind you, they will follow. So yeah, referendums, protest rallies are all good for raising awareness and stuff. What else did we learn? Oh yeah, so the people who are most affected by the declining, by the exclusionary educational system in this country, right? They are people of color, historically oppressed groups that have been denied in education. These are the people that are being hurt most by the affirmative action bans and the rising tuition rates that exclude poor and working class people from getting an education. Those are the people that we need to be organizing. We need to be organizing, in the Black Belt, where Black people are vastly underrepresented in schools. You can see where Tallahassee is 37% Black and Florida is 16%. Even at the height, which was the high number, 12.8% in 1999, that is still vastly underrepresented. And I'm willing to bet that every single school has that, where they have vast underrepresentation of minority students. If you live in Aslan, the historic Chicano nation, right? Chicano people are barred from receiving an education. American Indians are also incredibly underrepresented in higher education. Like FSU, which uses the imagery of American Indians with the mascot, the Seminoles, they systematically exclude American Indians from going to FSU, right? So, and wherever you go to school, I can bet that one of those things is true. Either you have affirmative action ban in your state, your university uses legacy preferences, or your university uses standardized testing requirements. Those are all things that hurt our goal and SDS's goal of having education for everybody, right? And that's what we need to continue to fight against. We need to continue to fight for an end to any sort of racist, sexist, exclusionary institutions that stand against our goal of a future where everybody has access to an education regardless of your socioeconomic status, your race, your gender, etc. Right? We need to continue to fight. So I'm gonna just one of the chants education is a right, fight, 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 fight. Education is a right, fight, 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 fight. Education is a right, fight, 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 fight. Education is a right, fight, 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 fight.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to keep it moving along. So our next speaker is going to be Bryn Dayton. And Bryn is an organizer with the University of Utah SDS chapter. They dream of burning flags and love doing security at all rallies when not trudging through piles of homework. So it's good luck for Bryn.
Thanks. So I'm going to talk about what my chapter has done with Education for All in the past year. So last year, we started out with, the last school year, we started out with the campaign to get state-funded scholarships for undocumented students. Because at that point in time, there had been a House bill that got privately funded scholarships for undocumented students. But students could still couldn't get publicly funded scholarships, and that is just another barrier to education that we just do not need.
Oh, sorry. Could you turn off your microphone and turn it back on?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Trump.
Is this better? Okay.
Yeah.
So this campaign didn't get a lot of traction on campus because for some reason the campus body just does not care about undocumented students, which is a shame. And we decided we were going to try to get legislation through because that's how the state had gotten privately funded scholarships. But the legislation didn't end up, pursuing legislation didn't end up being a viable option for us. So in summation, we decided we did not do enough research before deciding on our goals. So that's something, if you're out there deciding on a campaign, just want to make sure that you do a lot of research before you decide on your campaign so you can get good goals in place and not stumble into things like we did. But we learned how to do better rallies, And we also developed stronger ties. Awesome.
Batteries for
Batteries,
this.
awesome.
Maybe it won't fix it. Like you're all clapping before it got fixed. So we're gonna turn it back on and you're all gonna.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't turn it on.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. The revolution runs on Energizer. Okay. All right. So from this campaign, we learned how to do better rallies because we were out there doing rallies a lot, and we also had we ended with stronger ties with Somos, which is an undocumented student group on campus, and also Mecha, a Chicano activist group. So that was really awesome that we were able to like keep collaborating with those groups. And then Trump got elected. So we kind of had to change directions and go where the people were headed. And we participated on a walkout on an inauguration week on that Wednesday, and then also a rally on January 20th. And we did that. That was a rally that we co-hosted, and we had it downtown, so we were able to get students and also just community members out. So with Trump being elected, we kind of switched our goals, and we still wanted to focus on undocumented issues, but we changed our goal. Instead of getting state-funded scholarships, we were working more to get our campus to be a sanctuary campus. We had many different ways we were doing this. We had a petition out, we were holding rallies, we had a sit-in, like a really awesome 3-hour sit-in with drums. It was good. And then also dialogues with the administration, which was really awkward and not necessarily effective, but it was good to just get in there and see, like, yeah, the administration says, like, they say go out there and fight for this, but they're not going to help. Like they said that, go out, keep fighting, but we can't do anything for you. So it really exposed the just the contradictions between the students and the administration. So our demands with the sanctuary campus, our university was never declared a sanctuary campus, and they did not put out a statement to that effect. And most of our demands were half met by the U, but again, like, the university was not willing to take any risks, saying that, like, they weren't going to be there for their students. So again, in summation, that revealed the character of the administration. It also showed that they're totally willing to co-opt groups. They co-opted Somos, the undocumented student group, and they would tell Somos that they were sorry, that they're undocumented students, but again, they weren't willing to do anything. And from accounts from Somos students, they weren't actually willing to listen to what the students wanted to say either. And that just, again, that reveals that the struggle between the university administration and the students. So then we had the summer. Things kind of petered off in the summer. And then we came back. We had a rally for liberation for all and legalization for all after DACA was rescinded. That was a rally that we were able to have downtown. So again, get more community support and student support. And then a lot of our energy this year, just in the 2 months that we've been at school, has been focused on the Ben Shapiro protest, because Ben Shapiro was brought out to our school by Young Americans for Freedom, because we've got a bunch of shitty libertarian groups on our campus, and they brought Ben Shapiro out, and so we of course are gonna protest Ben Shapiro. So he spoke at our school on the 27th of September, and we organized a protest against him and his rhetoric. It was our largest on-campus event since we've become a chapter, so that was pretty exciting. I forget exactly how many students we got out to that, 400 people. So we had about 400 people that came out to that event, and it was an on-campus event, and usually we get around 50 to 70, I think, so 400 was awesome. There was also, we supported a sit-in held by Mecha that was before the event, And Mecha actually was able to corner the school president in his office. Usually when the president knows there's going to be a sit-in, like he just gets out of there beforehand, but no, he had to have the police escort him out because he was afraid. Yeah. And the actual protest was co-hosted with Black Lives Matter Salt Lake City, so that was awesome that we got to have community support. And so logistically, the rally went really, really well. And we were able to build like organizational power against hate speech, which so that was good. So now after all that, we were finally able to sit down and decide on a campaign, and we've decided that we're going to move into an anti-war campaign. And we can see that the hate speech that Shapiro says is part of the war machine. His oppressive speech is mirrored in the oppressive actions of the U.S. military. And so our goal, like part of our goal as students struggling is to like connect all the dots and like to tell students like this is what's happening, and these aren't like Ben Shapiro speaking at our campus is not like different from, or not, well, is connected to what the U.S. military is doing overseas and abroad. I mean, at home and abroad. So we just we see that the broader struggle for the anti-war is also connected to the struggle we started last year, fighting for state-funded scholarships for undocumented students, and that both campaigns are directed at opposing the oppression by U.S. imperialism at home and abroad of marginalized people. So we're committed to this fight against U.S. imperialism, and we're committed to like showing students that this is a fight that is worth supporting and that they need to come out and fight with us. So, yeah.
Right on. So moving to our final speaker is going to be Mark. So Mark is an organizer with the Progressive Student Union at the University of Texas Arlington. And Mark is going to talk to us today about sanctuary campus work at the University of Texas Arlington. So let's give it up for Mark.
All right, to sort of begin, I want to almost elaborate on the history of Progressive Student Union and how we got to Sanctuary Campus, because ultimately how to get to Sanctuary Campus, in my personal opinion, is the correct application of Mass Line, to where we took these ideas from the people and put them concretely in action. So our very first campaign, the PSU ever, was on student legal services, which was removed by the school in summer of 2015. The Shorthorn had posted about it like in June. No one's there, no one knows about it, barely anyone knows about it even when it was active. And the response of the administration, when ultimately we had done this campaign and only basically PSU was like maybe 3 or 5 people, was, well, not enough people used it, and we don't want to spend the money to give students legal services. And then what we find out later is that the university got their own lawyer to represent them. So that was the first campaign, and we learned a lot of errors from that, of how we should approach campaigns more often, to where we need to have actions. We don't need to petition every single time, because the petition process ultimately amounted to nothing. Our second campaign, and the dare say most successful campaign other than Sanctuary Campus DACA SB4, was the Black Lives Matter police brutality campaign that really put PSU on the spot and built it as a collective organization. This was during the time of ultimately a lot of police killings from Tyree King in Ohio, I believe, and all of these killings occurring at the same time ultimately led to this backlash. And we decided ultimately in the final semester prior to the actual fall hitting was that we need to do a Black Lives Matter campaign. And when we did these Black Lives Matter campaigns, we then began to see actual protests, actual people join PSU and stay there and coalesce there. And the main idea of this campaign was to ultimately have a petition to deliver to the Vice President of Student Affairs and have a concrete reality of ultimately just releasing a statement against police brutality. And then Donald Trump got elected. So this is ultimately when we began to shift our gears, because we had already delivered our petition by December. Donald Trump was already the president-elect, and considering what was happening, it was felt by the organization that we need to move towards Sanctuary Campus, because our own campus, which is knee-deep in Tejas, knee-deep in Aztlan, that it's about 16%, this was previously 16% Chicano, it is now about 21.9% Chicano. So it shows that the struggle for Chicano rights is especially prevalent here. So that is why we changed it. And then as we immediately began with the J20 March, we had successively, in just barely a week or two, had 3 successful marches, about 40 to 60 people each, one of which was not hosted by us whatsoever, and the administration decided to repress. They told the person, if you come here, and this is a UTA alumnus, this was a former UTA student, if you come here, the police will escort you out. It's because they watched her Facebook, and they're currently watching our Facebook right now. They basically were trying to harass her, trying to intimidate her, and while she did not come to the actual protest, I, Jay, and the University Democrats, as well as some teachers, professors, and community members came to it, and we ultimately decided to take it to not necessarily the streets, but make it militant, because ultimately what the Democrats were doing, they were deciding, well, let's just talk about how, it's just a pattern, all this is happening. So ultimately, doing this is that we see there is a contradiction happening, even in the very early days, of people who may agree with us, but when they are leading stuff, it ultimately ends to, well, let's just talk about it, let's talk about our feelings. But that doesn't advance the struggle, advance the line at the end of the day. What the mass line shows us when we did that is that ultimately every single person wanted to protest, and when they were told that Dr. Kabari was repressing this person, they got pissed. And these were just 20, 30 people, like on a Monday night, with no flyering whatsoever. The event was made on like Saturday or Sunday. It shows the veracity and the willingness of the masses to get involved. And the final thing before we ultimately began our True Sanctuary Campus campaign was, of course, the Muslim travel ban. We had ultimately cooperated with several other students on campus. They were just students without any organization whatsoever, and they had come to us. And ultimately, this was one of our largest protests, about 200 people. And ultimately, this showed that if you push forward the line, because we had to begin negotiations with the police and the administration, because since they were doing it on their own before they decided to cooperate and co-host with us, they ultimately had to discuss it with the police. And the police had specifically told them, you should just probably stay in the library. And what we're all thinking is like, well, wait a minute, there's like 200 people here. How are you going to get 200 people to stay in this small-ass, like, thing in front of the library? That's not going to, like, hold 200 people. Also, 200 people are going to get, like, a bit rowdy. Like, why are we just staying here listening to how, like, shitty the Muslim travel ban is? I think we all understand that it's shitty. So we ultimately said, oh, yeah, we'll, like, we'll just, we won't. If the people want to move, they want to move. We can't force them not to move. So we did that. It was the largest protest that we ever had at UTA in the past 40 years, because UTA was also the site of a lot of struggles against the Confederates. Because a bit of Arlington history for you is that UTA used to have rebel mascots. They used to be known as the Rebels. They used to have mock slave auctions. It was pretty bad. And that was the struggle of the 60s, and is now reflected now, because what we now see is that with the very much growing Chicano population here at UTA, we decided that Sanctuary Campus was the best route to go, and we had actually taken inspiration from both the Utah comrades as well as the Tallahassee comrades, and that a referendum would be the easiest way to go. And this is when ultimately the practical application of the mass line, both off the streets and on the streets, comes into effect. Because what we did off the streets is that we try to do negotiations, what me and Jay would say, with the horse's mouth of student government. And what the former president of student government used to say is that I will not have an undocumented student speak in my Congress sessions. And we curse ourselves every day that we didn't record that conversation, but we remember it very clearly because their entire mentality was, well, if we become a Sanctuary campus, isn't that like, threatening undocumented students? Isn't that putting their lives in danger? And ultimately, what we told them is like, well, here's the thing, there's also danger in inaction. And as we've seen, DACA has been rescinded. They can't just say, well, I mean, nothing's happening now. Clearly something is happening. And we ultimately pushed forward with the referendum. And at the last minute, YAF apparently come up and try to do a no, vote no campaign. And they were really, really pissed off when we won 75% of the vote, or 1,300. I think it's primarily because we had ultimately put the question of Sanctuary Campus into a very mass line statement to where, here's the thing, it is going to protect everyone, undocumented students, documented students, international students, the white crack boy somewhere in the back. But it's going to protect everyone because the whole thing is that Sanctuary Campus is FERPA. FERPA and Sanctuary Campus go part in a way. And we won that because ultimately even conservatives were like, you're going to win, no doubt. You're going to win because we voted for you, because we support that too. And ultimately, yeah, and I say this because it's very funny, they're like, well, you know what, Barry Goldwater lost, but then they got Reagan. And we're like, who's Barry Goldwater? Oh yeah, that guy. I can't believe people remember him and admire him. But that's the thing. And then ultimately we moved forward that the school likewise did not raise a statement. And when we met with the president and began to do negotiations with the president and try to do what we did in terms of the student government president, was that their justification for not releasing a statement is, well, it didn't go through the necessary processes. Because, it wasn't officially by student government, it was outside student government. And what we've noticed now is that ultimately student government, the short-horn, as well as the administration, are all attempting to forget as if this referendum happened and forget as if DACA was rescinded. Because while we have all of these workshops on SB4 and on DACA, nothing is being done. When ultimately it comes to SB4, the president decided to say, well, it won't affect method and modes of operations. And the thing is, as we've seen, we are becoming very fast and large. Because I will say, from 3 years when PSU was founded, it went from 3 people, myself included, to now our meetings have at least 14 people in them every week, and at most probably 22 to 25. And this is because of the application of the mass plan. Because, recently one of our members, Brian, who is a DACA student, he ultimately said one of the main reasons as to why people are feeling so comfortable, so safe, and so willing to work with us, and so proud that we're doing the work is because we are the only ones doing the work. Association for Mexican American Students, Latin American Student Organization, they're not doing anything because either one, they don't know the way because they do not know mass line, so we would need to take leadership. Number 2, they ultimately feel that getting political will cause a schism because they're ultimately a cultural organization. So if they go into politics, it will ruin them because they have to be friendly with the organization, with the administration. And finally, what we've seen is that if they do sometimes want to work with us, it's clearly that they want to gain something from this. And if it's mutually beneficial, sure, but if it's not, well, that's a question for another day. But how I bring this all into effect is that when we talk about Sanctuary Campus and we talk about ultimately how we can win these concrete goals, is that regardless of whether your school becomes a Sanctuary Campus is actually a secondary issue. What is the main issue is what are we winning for the students. If you can get, like let's say what we're trying to do, the school to reaffirm that HB 1403 exists, that all undocumented students, regardless of them being on DACA prior to coming into the school or prior or following the rescinding of DACA, gain in-state tuition, that is a better victory than Sanctuary Campus, especially with SB4. And now with SB4, this becomes a bit more of a hard battle because what I'll be talking about later in the workshop is that SB4 is a show me your papers law, as Christian previously said in the plenary, that creates this environment to where no city, no school in the entire state of Texas has control over their own police force. It makes all police officers in the state of Texas ICE deputies, essentially. And this is the forceful one. The volunteer one is 287G. But how this relates to our work is that if we are not able to ultimately lead, correctly apply Mass Line, and be there constantly when it comes to Sanctuary Campus, constantly comes to DACA, then we will not be able to actually win any concrete goals, and we will not be able to gain the following of the masses. Because at the end of the day, if a lone group started by this one weird random dude that likes cheddars and dinosaurs way too much can have an organization to where their first time coming to a national SDS convention bring 5 people and have meetings of 20 to 30 people, it shows that it is not just the person. It is not the person at all. What it is the correct application of Mass Line to where we understand the conditions on the ground, we understand the application of them, and we will move forward because we will be able to understand what we've done wrong and we've gotten this far. And what we hope to do now that ultimately we have met with the administration once is meet with them again and say, well, it's been a month and we need an update because as we all kind of know, and this is for all of our future ultimately probably events of something, if it comes time to December or January and there is nothing from Congress concerning DACA, then we all know the sad but horrible truth that DACA is dead. Because if they can't do it in 11 years, how could they do it in 3 months? And they won't, or they'll do it really shittily. And regardless, we need to prepare for that. And what we've learned, not only from hearing all of the speakers from all the plenaries and all the workshops, is that we need to correctly analyze these conditions. We need to ultimately decide and plan how we're going to approach this, because it's almost as if not only are you building student activists, but you're also making future labor activists. You're making future activists in general, because we need to know how to negotiate with the administration. We need to know how to force them to ultimately do certain things or to not do certain things. We need to make sure that at the end of the day, when we're gone, when we leave our SDSs to go onwards, the people who follow behind us will already know our errors and they'll make our greater successes. Thank you.
Hey, Fallon, can you hear us? Fallon?
Yes, I can. Sorry.
All right.
Put her back online.
All right, so we're gonna put you back on display mode for the questions. But anyway, so we're gonna take about 10 minutes for questions here. So if we have any questions for any of the panelists or them all together, feel free to raise your hand. But again, we're gonna keep it to around 10 minutes so that we can get moving with the final workshop and get off to dinner. So if there's any questions, raise your hand and I can call on you. Yep.
So coming from Florida, what do you think about the situation with Richard Spencer there? And do you think that are you satisfied with how it was handled?
Oh, the situation with Richard Spencer. You mean the University of Florida? Yeah, I heard he got shut down. So I think that's incredibly good. I remember Milo Yiannopoulos, before he became like as big as he is now, actually came to speak at FSU at one point. And it seems that like people at FSU didn't really seem to care as much. A lot of them are actually like Trump supporters at FSU. So like I think it's incredible that University of Florida managed to mobilize like enough people to successfully shut him down. I don't know what else to say except for that it's incredible, and I wish that we could have done something like that at FSU.
All right, another question? Y'all can just hold.
Yep. My question is about the sanctuary organizing. I know like the goal is to get these like policies and referendums to pass, but the moment ICE hits campus, what is there a response, sort of like a rapid response plan? Are there sanctuary spaces where people can actually go into sanctuary? And how does that look on campuses?
If I may. So this is what, now technically this has not happened at UTA, but this has happened at UTD over in Dallas, or technically Richardson. But basically what happened is that actually I see this student, Edwin Romero, was actually taken in on like traffic fines and fees and nearly deported on those traffic fines and fees. And what had happened as a rapid response is that immediately there were calls to liberate him. There was a rapid response in terms of the community. And what eventually happened is that he was released. And I believe at one point prior to him actually being taken, the police officers were surrounded. So to bring this to, I suppose, a campus setting is that, number one, there should absolutely be connections and ties with immigration community forces, because they will be able to bring the true force, the true mass, to where at the drop of a hat, they'll be there. That's the first thing. I know at UTA there actually are no actual sanctuary stuff. Now there is a religious center of sorts. So potentially that could be transferred into a sanctuary aspect, but I don't know the details on that. Other than that, there are a plethora of churches around the area. There is one that is actually very much into pro-immigrant rights work. It is St. Michael's Church at New York Avenue in Arlington. Maria Rosbla is a very good activist in that regard. So more than likely, if something was to happen, I won't even say if, when something happens, because it becomes a when at this point. It is not an if. When something happens, we need to get those allies there, necessary, and right there. So that's how I would respond to that, to where, judging from what we have seen over at UTD, we need to have a rapid response of having those allies, having potential churches, because at least from the moment from Texas, there are no like actual sanctuary spaces, and the only ones that are potentially are like religious spaces, and you'd have to like maybe argue that have a rapid response, have those sanctuary spaces in check, and third and most importantly, rapid response, and that the moment you hear about it, drop everything. Because if you don't drop everything, it's the one point to wrap this up, is that there are times to where you need to take time with tabling, with flyering, and there are times to where we need to get this shit done, because if we don't strike the iron while it's hot, the hammock's gonna break. Anyone else?
All right, any more questions? Yo.
Sorry to ask twice in the day, but I'm intrigued by your use of the term mass line many, many times. And I have some speculation of what it means, but maybe you could elaborate what it means and kind of where the whole doctrine and technique of mass
Of course.
So this is a big topic. We only have 4 minutes left, so try to keep it short.
One sentence. One sentence is that mass line is, let's take with Sanctuary Campus. The people want Sanctuary Campus. They want sanctuaries. They want their families to be defended. Mass line in this context would be, we take this idea and we apply it practically to where we make campaigns about Sanctuary Campus, but our intentions is that winning concrete goals for students. That would be an essence of mass line, to where PSU, SDS, there are multiple tendencies in these organizations, but that is not the main feature of it. The main feature of it is that we do work, we learn from our mistakes and our successes, and we apply a line to where we will be able to respond to the masses, and they will in turn respond to us.
All right, any more questions? We have 3 minutes, so probably just one more. All right, with that, let's move on to the final workshop session. Thanks to all of our speakers. Let's give them all.
Say goodbye with a chant.
Yeah, so who's got a good chant for education for all?
Education, not deportation.
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 So let's move on to the final workshop period, and then on to dinner. Thanks, Mel.
I'm a ball.
Yeah, well, you can table one day a year. It's the United Students Weekend, special weekend. It's not tabling, they give you like
I like that.
Oh yeah, we're all just
and another time we wanted to discuss Charlottesville, and the resident manager said, no, you can't discuss that. It's too hot of a topic, or upset. And actually shut down the discussion of Charlottesville. The church keeps it. So I'm actually filing it myself. I'm not even concerned. You see that 30 get in there, and it's like 42 US. Yeah. 42 US. The 42 US is any kind of a quasi-governmental perhaps your chloride claim that you go in and sue them in the federal district court. Okay, you don't have to be in prison. You study how to do it. All you have to do is go to the federal court, and they have some court to help you. Fill out the paper and just say, that I'm embarrassed to table here. And the school administration lying, and the trespasser, and so forth. This abrogation, abrogating my rights protected in the U.S. Constitution Amendment number 1. And it's a dump shot. It's not even hard to do. I've done it several times. Yeah, and then you can even get into money then. So, good luck.
Hey, yeah, good luck with your litigation.
Well, I'll see you guys get your tabling. That's atrocious. Yeah, you lost things.
I need my laptop back.
I should not be allowed to put your hand in it because I'm not actually.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
You were mentioning that.
I'm not really good at spatial reasoning.
No, it's fine. I'm sure people have done
Did you go to the thing about
Did you see Alex Colonna on Facebook?
Read this